My wife, the Queen V, never suspected a thing. When she returned to the office, I was gone, leaving only a lone final letter on my desk. It read, "Victoria, the divorce papers were finalized a month ago. We are both free from today. Wishing you and Ethan all the best, and may I find my own happiness." After reading it, Victoria, usually so composed, broke down in tears. She finally understood. My years of devoted, almost pathetic loyalty were all a calculated ruse to lower her guard and get her to sign those documents. It was all a meticulously orchestrated deception. "Seb," I said, "the merger agreement is ready. Please review it." The city lights twinkled outside, outlining the skyline. I withdrew my gaze, a faint smile playing on my lips. "Change it to a divorce agreement," I instructed. Silence filled the office, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. Sebastian, my lawyer, visibly startled, dropped his pen on the hardwood floor with a sharp click. "Sir? What did you say?" I turned, my voice calm but firm. "I said I'm divorcing Victoria." He stammered, "But to my knowledge, you and Ms. Lou haven't." I cut him off. "We married 3 years ago, but it was never public." My eyes fell on the merger agreement on the desk. "Make the divorce agreement look like a supplementary document to the merger." I gestured to the merger proposal. "Just attach it. This nationwide merger would be the perfect cover for ending my marriage." This merger had been in the works for 6 months, and we were finally at the signing stage. Lou Corporation wanted to acquire my chip company, and Victoria, as project lead, would undoubtedly attend tomorrow's board meeting. My opportunity would come tomorrow. Sebastian quickly regained his composure and explained the divorce proceedings. I feigned attention, my mind already on tomorrow's plan. I would have her unknowingly sign the divorce agreement within the merger documents. Under the bright lights, Sebastian swiftly drafted the agreement. As he handed it over, my eyes fell on the signature line on the last page. My fingers trembled slightly. Countless memories flooded back. 3 years ago, on a rainy day, we quietly registered our marriage at the courthouse. I believed that given enough time and space, she would eventually accept our marriage. But 3 years passed, and she maintained a subtle distance, always polite but distant. I took a deep breath and signed the agreement. My strokes were sharp, yet imbued with an indescribable finality. The next morning, the financial center bustled with activity. I arrived at the conference room half an hour early, subtly inserting the divorce agreement amongst the merger documents. At 9 a.m. sharp, Victoria arrived. Her beige suit accentuated her fair skin. Her hair was elegantly tied back, revealing a graceful neck. A ring adorned her slender finger, but it wasn't our wedding ring. No one would suspect that this powerful competitor was my wife, or that her heart belonged to someone else. Beneath her perfect makeup, a barely contained joy radiated. It was because Ethan was smiling at her from the audience. As I slid the merger documents across the table, my fingers trembled slightly. "Sign it," I said. "The company will be yours." The document was 200 pages long, with the divorce agreement hidden in the final appendix. Victoria flipped through the pages absent-mindedly, her gaze occasionally drifting towards Ethan. Watching her effortlessly sign the divorce agreement, I couldn't help but chuckle wryly. She hadn't even noticed what she was signing. Just like our 3-year marriage, she never truly invested herself in it. Our marriage began with an arranged meeting. At the time, Victoria was still recovering from her broken engagement with Ethan, while I had secretly loved her for 10 years. On our wedding day, she requested a secret marriage, and I agreed without hesitation, simply because being with her outweighed any other condition. Watching her unguarded joy at the sight of Ethan, my hand trembled. I handed her the prepared documents, my eyes fixed on her rapidly flipping fingers. Sure enough, she signed exactly where I'd marked, without even looking. She was always like that, nonchalant about everything I gave her. Only After the click of her heels faded down the corridor, did I slowly unclench my fist. I pulled a photo from my bag, our wedding photo from 3 years ago. In the picture, she smiled weakly, as if fulfilling an obligation. As I tore the photo, I recalled the encrypted album on her phone last night. It contained photos of Ethan from his early entrepreneurial days to his current success as a CEO. Every single one. The latest one was Ethan's divorce announcement on social media with a simple caption, "A new beginning." That night, Victoria, always so composed, got unexpectedly drunk. Her usually cold eyes were filled with unrestrained joy. That's when I understood. She had never truly moved on from that relationship. Our secret marriage had been her refuge from reality, and I had always been a mere substitute. Exiting the conference room, I overheard the whispers of the secretaries. Ethan finally divorced. I wonder if he'll end up with Vicky. They've been childhood sweethearts, a perfect match, made for each other. A cynical smile played on my lips. Yes, a perfect match. Victoria, you'll get your wish soon enough. Once this month-long cooling-off period is over, you can be openly with him. No more being bound by this marriage, no more pretending for my sake, no more suppressing your feelings. From today, I set you free. The financial center's ballroom glittered. A celebratory merger party was in full swing. Sebastian, this merger is a national sensation. Another toast to you. Amidst the clinking glasses, I drained my glass. It contained water, but nobody knew, not even Victoria standing a short distance away. Even if she did know, she wouldn't care. She was surrounded by investors, exuding an effortless grace. The crystal chandeliers cast a glow on her exquisite profile. She looked like a painting. I watched, a wry smile on my lips. This radiant Victoria never belonged to me. Her heart, her eyes have always belonged to another. A gasp rippled through the crowd near the champagne fountain. Ethan appeared in the ballroom, holding a glass, his gaze fixed on Victoria. He walked towards her with unwavering determination. Watching their oblivious intimacy, I feigned intoxication, swaying as I stood. Victoria's eyes found mine. "Enough, don't drink anymore," she said, steadying me. With an apologetic smile to the others, she said, "Sebastian's had a bit too much to celebrate. I'll take him to rest." In the elevator, I leaned against the cold metal wall, eyes closed, enduring the swaying ascent. Victoria's hands were occupied with her phone. I caught a glimpse of her screen. She was chatting with Ethan, a joyful smile on her face. She didn't notice my ashen complexion. Her faint perfume, intensified in the confined space, became pungent. I knew it was a birthday gift from Ethan. She loved it, wearing it almost every day. The one I gave her lay forgotten, at the bottom of a drawer in her vanity. Moment the presidential suite door closed, Victoria's lips were on mine. I leaned back slightly, murmuring through a feigned drunken haze, "Let me shower first." "I'll help you," she offered, reaching for my tie. I caught her wrist, silently refusing. Using my supposed inebriation as an excuse, I slowly released her hand, saying, "I'm too tired. Let me be alone for a while." This subtle rejection mirrored our 3-year marriage, outwardly harmonious, inwardly distant. Victoria didn't push it, simply humming in agreement and going to pour water. Watching her graceful back, I closed my eyes. The drunkenness was fake, but the despair was real. Soon, after the divorce papers were finalized, even this tender moment would be a memory. Leaning on the sofa, my eyes were clear. Even with her so close, her heart was elsewhere. "Oh," Victoria suddenly recalled, "I haven't finished reviewing today's merger documents." My heart clenched. Feigning deeper intoxication, I mumbled, "Head spinning. We'll talk tomorrow." Before I finished, her phone rang. The moment she saw the caller ID, her whole demeanor tightened. She murmured, "Ethan, so late." A frantic voice came from the phone. Tiffany's gone crazy. She's vandalized the company's servers, all the project data. Victoria stood up abruptly, quickly putting on her coat. Sebastian, I have to go to Jixiang Investments. Something's happened with Ethan. Seeing her urgency, I pretended to be even more drunk. His ex-wife again? I asked. Yeah, she smashed the servers. The company's in chaos, she explained, putting on her shoes. I've got bodyguards with me. Don't worry. Once the door closed, my sobriety returned instantly. I checked my phone. Sure enough, Ethan's post was on my social media feed, a live video. He stood on the company rooftop. The camera slowly panned across the skyline. Victoria briefly appeared, helping him deal with the server issue. The caption read, "Yesterday's darkness is past. A new journey begins." I suddenly understood. The server incident was just an excuse for their rendezvous. I chuckled bitterly, rising to go to the closet. I took out everything I'd given Victoria over the past 3 years, neatly packing it into boxes. This included the perfume, its outer packaging covered in dust. When Victoria returned and saw me packing, she asked, "Why are you suddenly sorting through these?" Without looking up, I replied, "No longer needed. I'm donating them." She nodded. Good idea. She glanced at the boxes but didn't ask further, turning to the bathroom. I watched her back, my expression calm. If she opened the boxes, she would see all the love I had given her. But she didn't. Just like in our 3-year marriage, she never truly cared about my feelings or actions, nor the meaning behind them. The next morning, the recyclers came. A box overflowing with what was once love was carted away as refuse. A wave of relief washed over me. Soon, the divorce papers would be finalized and it would all be over. The setting sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office as I reviewed the post-merger data reports. Suddenly, I found I couldn't log into the system. "Sorry, Mr. Sebastian," a voice crackled through the phone from the IT department. "There's a server issue. We need Ms. Victoria's authorization." I chuckled wryly, glancing at Victoria's bustling form in her office across the hall. I'd been deliberately avoiding her for the past few days, yet here I was, forced to seek her out. As I crossed the glass corridor, I overheard whispers from the secretaries. I heard the chairman specifically requested +1s for tonight's celebratory dinner. Everyone wants to see Miss Vicky's mysterious boyfriend. I bet it's Mr. Ethan. Look how seamlessly they worked together on the merger. I knocked on Victoria's door. She was on a call. Hearing my footsteps, she hung up quickly. "Sebastian, what is it?" she asked. I handed her a note reading, "Your authorization required." As she typed in her password, a message popped up in our WeChat group. "Attention all departments, tonight's celebratory dinner is mandatory for all senior managers and their partners. Victoria, the entire finance world is wondering about your significant other. Tonight's the night we get to meet them." It was signed by Seb himself, followed by a string of playful emojis. My fingers trembled slightly, but my gaze remained fixed on Victoria's face. She was clearly stunned. Looking at me with a hint of uncertainty, she asked, "Why don't you come with me?" The words felt like a dull knife slowly twisting in my heart. 3 years. Our marriage had always been a secret. I chuckled bitterly. What was the point of admitting it now, when we were about to divorce? Without hesitation, I refused. "I have a meeting with venture capitalists tonight," I said, forcing a smile, "and you probably wouldn't want to go with me anyway." Victoria opened her mouth to speak but said nothing. Her silence hit me like a ton of bricks. I was glad I hadn't clung to any illusions. I turned and said, "Send me the data once it's fixed." That night the hotel glittered. As soon as Victoria entered the ballroom, she was surrounded by board members. "Miss Vicky," they said, "you should find someone to take care of you. With your status, it's a shame to be alone. Shall we make some introductions?" Amidst the clinking glasses, Victoria opened her phone. Her Top 2 contacts, Sebastian and Ethan. After a moment's hesitation, she messaged Ethan. For the first time in 3 years, she was inviting him to such an event. Ethan arrived, shortly, impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit, exuding an air of refined elegance. The room buzzed with approval. Then her assistant rushed over. "Miss Vicky, there's been a leak. The merger documents are online. Someone's revealed." Victoria snatched the tablet and quickly scanned the post. The words "divorce agreement" made her hand tremble. A dreadful premonition surged through her. Her eyes frantically searched for Sebastian. For the first time, she left Ethan's side and hurried towards me. "What is this?" she demanded. Our eyes met. I stood by the window, impeccably dressed, my expression calm. An investor wanted advice on the divorce case. I made an introduction, and it seems the documents were accidentally attached to the contract. Before she could question further, a familiar voice called out, "Victoria, the chairman's looking for you." Ethan's arm draped naturally over her shoulder. Victoria froze. She couldn't meet my gaze, yet she couldn't push Ethan away either. I merely nodded curtly. "Thank you for your concern, Miss Vicky," I said, my tone distant and polite. "Let's discuss business another time." As I turned, I heard whispers. "It's Mr. Ethan, after all. They're the perfect match in the finance world." Yes, I chuckled bitterly to myself. They were the perfect match. I was just an accident. Back in my office, I stood by the window, watching the lights in the opposite building dim one by one. Ethan's arm around Victoria replayed endlessly in my mind. The intimacy stung. Perhaps I was too deeply wounded to feel the pain anymore. Only exhaustion remained. 30 days left of the divorce cooling-off period. Why did it feel so long? The coffee on my desk was cold. I rubbed my tired eyes and continued working on the post-merger integration. At 3 a.m., my assistant arrived with the latest financial reports. "Mr. Sebastian, the post-merger integration plan." She paused, hesitant. "Should you go to the hospital? You look pale." "No," I said, picking up the cold coffee. My gaze drifted to the building across the street. Through the glass curtain wall, the hotel lights shone brightly. Recalling the scene from the dinner party, a wave of irony washed over me. 3 years of marriage, and in the eyes of others, I was merely a defeated acquisition target. But Ethan, he could stand beside her openly. 3 a.m., I finally finished the last document. I rubbed my temples, only to feel a sudden dizziness. Then, a wave of nausea surged up from my throat. Sebastian, my assistant, looked up just as I coughed up a mouthful of blood. I collapsed from my chair, hitting the floor hard. My assistant rushed over, crying out, "Mr. Sebastian, hold on, I've called an ambulance." In the private room, Professor Charles examined me, his brow furrowed. "He needs immediate surgery," he said grimly. "It's acute gastritis caused by long-term malnutrition and overwork. We need to contact his family." I looked at the top number on my phone, hesitated for a few seconds, and dialed. After a dozen missed calls, the screen remained on the dialing interface. My assistant cautiously asked, "Perhaps Miss Victoria is busy with Ethan's investment deal?" "She's always busy," I said, my voice weak. I forced a bitter smile. "Always. Like every late night for the past 3 years, I've canceled all my engagements to wait for her to come home for dinner. She's been entertaining clients. I studied finance for a year to help her, but she said I was an outsider. I prepared a month-long birthday surprise, but she changed her plans at the last minute to discuss a project. People have to learn to accept reality, don't they?" My assistant quietly opened WeChat. The work group already had 99 plus unread messages. The picture showed Victoria and Ethan cutting a cake together. He glanced at my weakened state and silently turned off the screen. The doctor, holding the surgery consent form, looked serious. "But we need a family member's signature." It's not necessary, I said, closing my eyes. In another half a month, she will no longer be my family. Mr. Sebastian, the doctor said, I don't care what kind of conflict you have with your wife, but right now she's still your legal spouse. My eyes held a hint of sarcasm as I looked at the doctor seriously. You saw that she didn't answer my calls. Does that mean I should just wait to die? Professor Charles sighed and let my assistant sign. The surgery was successful, but I spent 5 days in the ICU. Besides my assistant, no one else visited. It wasn't until the 6th day that Victoria rushed in. She looked at the numbers on the monitor, her brow furrowed. Why didn't you tell me about something this serious? I looked at her perfectly applied makeup, the look of someone fresh from a business gala. You must be very busy, I said. The Zhixiang acquisition is more important than this little problem of mine that day. She seemed to want to explain but hesitated. I asked, I heard Mr. Ethan's divorce proceedings are finished. Victoria was startled but nodded. Yes, it's all over. Congratulations on the launch of Ethan Industries, I said softly. Looks like the stock market reaction is good. She was about to speak when her phone rang again. Seeing the caller ID, she hesitated for a moment before turning towards the corridor. Half an hour later, she returned, only to hear Sebastian's voice from the room. Don't worry about the board meeting. Once the divorce cooling-off period is over, everything will be settled. Victoria's heart skipped a beat. She pushed open the door and asked, What cooling-off period? I hadn't expected her to overhear. Fortunately, my assistant was quick-witted and immediately interjected, Miss Victoria, Mr. Sebastian is helping me with my divorce. My wife and two. I added calmly, have been having some marital issues recently. Lawrence, the lawyer, is an expert in this area, and I thought he could help. The VIP room fell silent. Victoria's gaze flitted between the two of us. Her intuition told her something wasn't right, but before she could speak, her phone rang again. The caller ID, Ethan. She glanced at the screen, then at my pale face, hesitating for a moment before finally pursing her lips. I'll take this call. Watching her leave, I closed my eyes. The moment she chose to answer that call, everything was decided. Miss Sebastian, my assistant began, hesitant. It's all right, I said softly. It couldn't have been kept secret for much longer. When Victoria returned, I was leaning against the headboard, reviewing documents. My composure unnerved her. I just asked the doctor, she said. He said you'll be discharged next week. I'll come pick you up then. No need, I said without looking up. Just send the driver. You're busy. The words were natural, yet they made Victoria strangely uneasy. Her voice softened, a tenderness unprecedented towards me. Sebastian, I know you're still blaming me, but that day I interrupted her. You don't need to explain. After the merger, you have a lot to deal with. I understand. Victoria breathed a sigh of relief. But, she continued, I am still your wife. So when you're discharged, I'll come get you. To make it up to you, okay? At the mention of her role as my wife, I managed a weak smile. All right. She seemed about to say something else but stopped, remembering Ethan's urgent call. She simply nodded. I should get back to the company. There's a lot of post-merger work. Okay, I said. Drive safely. A week later, I checked myself out alone. The nurse gossiped, asking about my beautiful wife. I gave a forlorn smile. She's very busy, I said. She doesn't need to come. I can manage on my own. Just before I checked out of the hospital, I saw Ethan's Instagram post. A vacation photo in Miami Beach, captioned, "Much needed relaxation. Thanks for the company." The sun was beautiful in the picture, and there were 2 sets of footprints in the sand. I called Victoria. The sound of ocean waves was in the background. What's wrong? She asked, her voice a little flustered. Leaning against the window, I said, Nothing. Just wanted to tell you I'm out of the hospital. What? Today? She asked. She paused. I'm sorry, I'm on a business trip. To Miami? I asked. There was a brief silence. Yes, she said. There's an impromptu meeting. Just be careful about the sun. I hung up. After discharge, I opened my calendar. 10 days left in our separation period. 10 days until our marriage officially ended. 10 days until she could be with Ethan openly. 10 days until my freedom. Walking out of the hospital, the bright sunshine felt strangely comforting. I shielded my eyes. For the first time, the concrete jungle felt expansive. Letting go of a relationship was lighter than I thought. Even breathing felt easier. My stomach hadn't fully healed, but I had already started working on the relocation of Galaxy Tech. After the merger, the company would move to the financial center, sharing a building with Vicky's company, Liu Group. Seb, the equipment list has been verified, my assistant Lucy said, walking in with a tablet. But your private office? Everything is according to plan, I replied, lightly tapping on my keyboard. My gaze fell on the opposite building, where offices were being emptied. The entire top floor was bustling with activity. Cardboard boxes, equipment, and files filled the hallways. The sounds of demolition and equipment movement were incessant. Victoria rushed in and froze at the doorway. She hadn't expected me to start the move so quickly. She walked to the window, looking at the emptied office space. Is the financial center ready? She asked. Yes, I said without looking up. The new location is better suited for a tech company. Victoria changed the subject. Lucy said you had her clear out the top floor lounge. Wasn't that your favorite? I interrupted her. I don't need it anymore. Some habits need to change. She unconsciously glanced at a potted plant in the corner, one we had carefully chosen from a greenhouse last year. Now, it was labeled for disposal. Just as she was about to say something, she noticed that the boxes the crew was carrying contained only her belongings, records of our collaboration from the early stages of the merger. Where's your stuff? She asked. It's all taken care of, I replied decisively. Victoria assumed it was all moved to the new office and didn't ask further. Checking the relocation list, she casually said, remember to have them label and categorize everything. Don't mix them up. I watched her back, some words forming on my lips, then swallowing them. I won't mix them up, I said, because the new office will only have her things. By the time the last box was sealed, dusk had fallen. As I leaned against the wall preparing to go downstairs, I ran into Ethan and his investment team at the elevator. Victoria was taken aback. She instinctively let go of my arm, took a step forward and said, "What are you doing here?" Ethan smiled. "I heard you were moving. I happened to be nearby and wanted to see if you needed any help." His gaze fell on me. "Haven't we met at a private board meeting?" A faint smile played on my lips. I extended my hand. "Mr. Ito, good observation. We have." Ethan's eyes lit up. "How about we grab dinner to celebrate?" he suggested. I glanced at Victoria's conflicted expression and gently shook my head. "I'm not feeling well today." "Another time." Victoria quickly ushered me into the car. "I'll take you home to rest," she said, turning to Ethan. "You guys go ahead. I'll catch up later." In the basement, I said, "I've already arranged for a car." I stepped aside, avoiding her hand. "You guys need to discuss your project." For some reason, Victoria felt my magnanimity and detachment were excessive. She racked her brain for an explanation. I spoke first. "No need for explanations, didn't we agree? We wouldn't go public with our relationship until both of us felt it was the right time." "You're not ready yet. I understand." Victoria's heart sank a little. She pursed her lips. "After some time, after I've adjusted, I'll go public." I didn't respond, just stared at the floor. 3 years. She always said she'd wait for the right time, but I couldn't wait any longer. How many 3-year periods does a person have? I'm truly exhausted. I looked up and softly said, "Go back. Mr. Ito's waiting." Victoria, seeing my distant attitude, wanted to explain again. but Ethan's urging messages kept arriving. She apologized. "Let's talk at home." The elevator doors closed, and I saw her hesitant expression. Once I would have been captivated by her every expression. Now, none of it mattered. The car merged into traffic. The shadows of the sycamore trees along the roadside flickered, a reflection of the past 3 years. From the beginning of the merger, I knew this day would come, just a little earlier. What difference does it make? I closed my eyes, letting the night conceal my expression. The neon lights outside flickered, mirroring the ups and downs of those 3 years. The infatuation of years had solidified into an obsession, but finally, I let it go. Our marriage was a mistake from the start. Wrong people must say goodbye. On the drive back, I stared at my tablet, silent. The data analysis showed Galaxy Tech's post-merger market capitalization steadily rising. This should have been cause for celebration. Victoria saw my weary profile, recounting recent events, concluding the merger had been too demanding, hence my distraction. After a moment, she said, "Next week is the first anniversary of the merger and our 3rd wedding anniversary. Let's go to the Maldives for a few days." I continued watching the market without looking up. "I'm not feeling well lately. Let's skip it," she asked. "Then how about the Azure Sea Club? Their rooftop restaurant overlooks the entire financial center." No. I rejected several more suggestions with various excuses. This apathy was a stark contrast to my former self, whose eyes would light up at the mention of a date. Seeing her confused expression, I put down the tablet. "Let's go to the stock exchange." Victoria frowned. "The stock exchange?" I smiled. "Isn't that where you first started working? Let's revisit the listing hall." Silence fell again. I opened my calendar, November 7th, the divorce agreement's effective date. November 7th was also our wedding anniversary and the 10th anniversary of our first meeting at the stock exchange. Ending it there felt fitting. I half joked, "You won't stand me up again, will you?" Victoria smiled. "When did I ever stand you up?" I didn't answer, silently counting. Once she'd been with Ethan negotiating a merger, leaving me alone in the hospital. Another time she'd missed our IPO celebration because of his acquisition. And another she'd missed a restructuring meeting for his investment conference. A week later, autumn sunlight bathed Wall Street. I put on the dark blue suit I wore for the merger signing, grabbed my camera. Today I would document the final farewell. Victoria was waiting downstairs. Seeing my radiant appearance, her spirits lifted. "Let's take lots of pictures," she said. We laughed and talked our way into the exchange. As I began recounting our first meeting, Victoria's phone rang. It was Ethan. "Victoria, I'm at the hospital. The post-restructuring data is messed up. The stock price is plummeting." The board. Her hand froze. I turned and saw her troubled expression. "Ethan's in trouble. I have to go. An hour later, is that okay?" "No, it's really urgent." She began packing. I watched her leave without protest. I opened my phone. Ethan's social media post appeared. A pale Ethan half lying in a hospital bed. Victoria carefully blowing on a bowl of porridge. So this was her important matter. She always had something more important than me. Everything clicked. It was all an excuse. She was going to Ethan. I smiled. For Ethan's indigestion, she wouldn't even give me half an hour. Recalling her hurried departure, I shook my head. "Victoria, if you knew this was our last time, would you still rush away?" No one could answer, nor did I seek an answer. I emailed my lawyer. "Lawrence, today's the last day of the divorce cooling-off period. Any further procedures?" He replied quickly. "Everything's done, Sebastian. You're free from today. Congratulations on your rebirth." Rebirth. The word felt liberating. Letting go felt like shedding a heavy burden, yet losing all weight at once, leaving me unsure how to stand. Back in the office, I began packing. Our shared triumphs became memories to be cleared. the mug she used to make my first coffee with a faint lipstick mark, the project proposal she'd reviewed, covered in her neat yet forceful notes. The photo of us ringing the bell, her beside me, smiling radiantly. Each item told a story of a time I couldn't return to. 10 years, long enough to turn all obsession into farewell. I folded the letter, placing it beneath a pen. I picked up my packed bag. This office, filled with memories, would welcome a new owner. Victoria, from now on, we have no ties. I wish you all you desire. I left without looking back. I felt weak, needing 10 years to finally remove someone who didn't include me in their heart. Meanwhile, Victoria, having dealt with Ethan's company crisis, finally relaxed upon seeing his post. Thanks, Victoria, for your help. We made it through this time. Driving back, Victoria suddenly remembered their appointment. She called Sebastian, but his phone was off. Several texts went unanswered. For the first time in 3 years, she couldn't reach him. A strange panic seized her. She immediately turned the car around and headed to the office. Sebastian would probably still be working late. Entering the office, everything was perfectly in place except for any trace of him. She frantically searched floor after floor, finding nothing. Finally, back in her office, she saw it, a letter resting quietly on her desk. It read, "A month ago, the divorce papers were signed. From today, we are both free. Wishing you and Ethan all the best and hoping I can live my life to the fullest." Each word was a knife piercing Victoria's heart. Her fingers trembled, her breath hitched. Papers signed. When? Her pen slipped from her hand, clattering onto a stack of documents. The top one was a divorce agreement. Her pupils constricted. She trembled as she turned to the last page. Sebastian's signature was neat and decisive, and on the left her own signature, Victoria. A flood of overlooked details washed over her. The day of the merger signing, he'd asked for her signature, having just come from Lawrence's office. Lawrence's fleeting look of panic when he handed her the documents, the things that Sebastian had gradually removed over the past month. All her memories, probably. The new office in the financial district. She understood. Everything was arranged according to her preferences, a carefully orchestrated deception, allowing her to sign the divorce papers herself before he quietly disappeared. Rage and panic surged. She grabbed the agreement and her pen, rushing towards the elevator. The office door slammed open. Lawrence jumped at the sudden noise. "This divorce agreement," Victoria demanded, her voice trembling. "Did you handle this?" Lawrence, startled by the normally decisive Queen V's emotional distress, lowered his coffee. "Yes, I handled it. Everything was done according to procedure. What's wrong?" Victoria clutched the agreement, her voice barely a whisper. "Why? Didn't you tell me? This is my divorce." Time froze. Her mind went blank except for the word divorce, echoing endlessly. 10 years. They had been together for 10 years. Why? The question was like a bucket of cold water. Images flooded her mind. Sebastian waiting alone, the weekends she'd brushed off with work excuses, the warmth she'd taken for granted. All of it transformed into daggers suffocating her. She adjusted her clothing, a practiced gesture, used countless times in boardrooms and negotiations. Her perfect demeanor was her armor, but now, her hands shook. Her composure, her pride crumbled. She'd been the youngest CEO, the most successful businesswoman, but she'd forgotten. She hadn't fulfilled her duties as a wife. But she had no time for appearances now. Memories surged. Sebastian's weary voice on the day she signed the contract. She finally understood. She clenched the divorce agreement, crumpling it in her hand. She remembered their arguments. Sebastian always gave in first. She'd never noticed the sadness in his eyes. "This can't be," she whispered, but another voice asked, "How could you ignore his love? How could you let him wait so long?" "Mzlu." Lawrence hesitated, unsure how to address this broken woman. Victoria, lost in thought, remembered Sebastian never called her Miss Lou. He always softly called her Victoria, with a gentleness she now understood and cherished. "Why?" she asked, her eyes brimming with tears. She saw Sebastian eating alone, countless missed dates because of her work, his disappointed yet still smiling face. Lawrence, witnessing the usually steely financial queen's vulnerability, thought of Sebastian sitting calmly discussing the divorce details, the heartbreak hidden beneath the calm. He sighed. Perhaps he waited too long. The words were a dull knife slowly cutting into Victoria's heart. Yes, he had waited so long. For a glance, a word of concern, for her to put down her phone and talk to him, but she was always busy, chasing the next project, the next merger, never truly seeing his weight. Victoria stumbled back, collapsing onto the leather sofa. Details she'd ignored flooded back with agonizing clarity. Sebastian had been punctual, picking her up and dropping her off every day, even when she'd changed her schedule on a whim. He'd remembered every important date for her, yet she'd forgotten their anniversaries. He'd meticulously managed their life together, while she remained oblivious to his current projects. He asked if I wanted to review the documents, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. I signed without even looking. How ironic, she murmured, tears welling up. The tears held a torrent of regret, loss, and remorse, known only to her, Lawrence. Her lawyer offered a tissue. He said it's better to let go than to wait to be abandoned. At least that way you preserve some dignity, he stated gently. Victoria looked up sharply. He thought I would abandon him. The anniversary had been Sebastian's last attempt at reconciliation. He'd known, long before that day, that it would be their last meeting. She'd been too obtuse to realize it, feeling the sting of loss only after it had happened. I'm sorry, Victoria said, her voice tight with emotion. I'm overwhelmed. Taking a deep breath, she asked, Can you give me his new contact information? Lawrence looked hesitant. Please, she pleaded, using the word for the first time in her life. He shook his head gently. Seb did leave contact details before he left, but you're in the financial world. You understand client confidentiality, especially with the post-merger non-compete agreement. Victoria bit her lip. She'd even hidden their marriage. What right did she have to question anyone else's privacy? How is he? She whispered. Lawrence paused, peaceful. He said, when the time is right, you learn to let go. Standing before the floor-to-ceiling window, Victoria gazed at the financial center she'd built, its glass facade shimmering under the sun, the brightness painful to her eyes. Their offices should have been on the top 2 floors, the ones with the best view. It had been intended for him. Now she understood why all the blueprints had been redrawn, why the renovations were restarted. From the beginning, he hadn't intended to stay. The financial center blazed with lights, a familiar nighttime scene, yet tonight it felt overwhelmingly lonely. From her penthouse office, she saw the darkened windows of the Galaxy Tech headquarters across the street. For the first time, she understood the meaning of near yet far. She stared at the divorce papers and the single photograph Sebastian had left behind, her gaze fixated on his focused profile. Memories of overlooked details surfaced, his position always a step behind her, like a silent guardian. She'd never even looked back. The warmth she'd taken for granted, the everyday kindnesses, all unspoken expressions of his love. A sharp pain pierced her heart. The office lights had always been on for her, late into the night. She recalled her cynical jokes with Sebastian. These lights are like my life, they never go out. But now it wasn't eternal light, it was his stubborn waiting. When she'd faced difficulties in mergers and acquisitions, crucial data always appeared in her inbox. She'd attributed it to efficiency, professionalism, and the prowess of her team. Now she understood the sleepless nights behind those emails, the meticulous analysis, the countless hours of his solitary efforts. Even the ergonomic chair she sat in had been custom made for her, a testament to his awareness of her smallest preferences. He remembered her every habit, but what had she done for him? Her phone rang. It was Ethan. The name, once a source of exhilaration, now felt foreign. She didn't answer. She began reviewing a month's worth of emails. Every merger document, every project report, revealed his careful planning, his silent farewell. 2 hours earlier, all access to the contract management system had automatically transferred to her account. 3 years from the casually signed marriage certificate to the unwitting divorce, she'd never truly appreciated their relationship. Ms. Vicky, her assistant, knocked. "The board wants you to review this," Victoria suddenly spoke. "Is Seb's smart platform still in use?" "He deleted all the code before he left," her assistant replied. "He said it was for post-merger data security." Another blow. She finally understood his words. Some habits are time to change. He'd erased himself, from the code to her heart. The potted plant on her desk, a shared selection, continued to grow. She remembered Sebastian saying, "Like the stock market, even in the coldest winter, if you endure, you'll see spring." But this winter, spring seemed lost forever. "Ms. Vicky," her assistant whispered hesitantly. Sebastian left. A password before departing, whispering that it was for an encrypted file. The password was their wedding date. Victoria trembled as she opened it, revealing a coded message. A note read, "This is the company's core technology." The thought of him using their wedding date as a password, planning his exit while still considering her future, brought tears uncontrollably to her eyes. Victoria, she had taken 3 years to realize how happy she had been. But now, she had destroyed that happiness with her own hands. Ott had transferred all his shares, officially resigning from the board of Galaxy Tech. The news sent shockwaves through the financial world. No one understood why the founder would choose to completely leave after a recently completed merger. Victoria stood at the press conference, watching reporters' questions fly. Was this a malicious sell-off? Discontent with the Lu acquisition? Would Jixiang Investment take over the shares? She responded mechanically, her gaze fixed on the empty seat in the corner, Sebastian's usual spot on the board. After the meeting, she had all the transfer documents collected. Reviewing them, she discovered he had started quietly liquidating his holdings a month prior using various accounts. A report from her investment bank arrived. Galaxy Tech founder's complete exit, market confidence shaken, downgrade recommended. She gave a bitter smile. He used the most professional financial methods to leave, right in front of everyone. But nobody knew she had lost not market value but a true heart. Behind those cold numbers was a relationship she had destroyed. Lawrence, her lawyer, handed her a document. "Sebastian's final instruction. He wanted me to give this to you today." It was a transfer agreement, gifting all his technology patents to Liu Corp, dated a month ago. "He called it your divorce present," Lawrence added, pausing. "A fair trade. We're even." Victoria's fingers trembled slightly. Sebastian was always decisive, yet he had taken a whole month to orchestrate his departure. She finally understood. It wasn't reluctance to leave, but a desire for a graceful separation, just like their marriage, perfectly presented on the surface. That evening, financial news channels continued to roll. Galaxy Tech founder's mysterious exit. AI giant Sebastian's whereabouts unknown. Liu Corp issues clarification statement. Victoria leaned back in her office chair, trying to pinpoint the turning point. Board changes, equity transfers, technology transfers, every step meticulously planned. No, it should have been earlier. She opened the meeting records from the merger period, her eyes stopping at the investment meeting 6 months prior. The moment Ethan appeared, she saw something shatter in Sebastian's eyes. Those always warm eyes displayed an emotion she couldn't decipher. Now she realized it was the resignation of a man who had seen through everything. She, however, was caught up in the joy of the merger, thrilled to have met a kindred spirit, unaware that her every joyous moment was a wound to Sebastian. After that day, he began preparing all the handover documents. Her fingers trembled as she opened the project folder on her computer. From that moment, he had decided to leave. Those meticulously prepared handover documents, that meticulous exit strategy, were his silent dignity. Victoria held her head, recalling the past years. 10 years ago, as the Queen V of Liu Corp, she had spotted this self-made tech genius. She admired his talent but never truly understood his heart. If she had once been drawn to Ethan's aristocratic charm, that feeling had subsided years ago. Yet, she felt guilty towards Sebastian, who had always been there for her. Perhaps that guilt led her to accept the marriage under her parents' pressure. She naively believed giving him a chance was the best compensation, unaware that for someone who deeply loved her, such a marriage was the greatest torment. In every merger negotiation, she pursued perfect valuations, but never seriously accounted for her feelings. She gave him a marriage certificate, but never her heart. She thought she was giving him a chance, but it was the deepest wound to him. After the investment meeting, Sebastian stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, his gaze distant and detached. Some waiting consumes all courage. She'd thought he was referring to the uncertainty of the merger. Now she understood he meant their marriage. The man who had always been understanding and supportive had finally lost hope in his hopeless waiting. Staring out at the late night, Victoria questioned herself for the first time. Love wasn't a business transaction. It didn't need fairness, logic, or profit and loss. Yet, she used a transaction to hurt the person she shouldn't have. Perhaps from the start, the mistake wasn't the choice, but her heart. She had filled the void with her career. Victoria, Queen Viv, filled every gap in her life, yet forgot that marriage required nurturing and love, cherishing. Only when she lost it did she realize she didn't even have the right to plead. Not until the office lights flickered one by one in the late night did Victoria finally allow herself to succumb to her chaotic thoughts. Tears blurred her vision. Everything she had been proud of seemed worthless in the face of her failed relationship. For years she had thrived in the business world, yet she had lost terribly in love. Every business decision was impeccable, every move flawless, except for the most crucial one, her relationship. She remembered her apprehension when she proposed a secret marriage to Sebastian. He had almost instantly agreed. Now, looking back, she wondered what his feelings had been at the time. Had a flicker of pain crossed his always gentle eyes when he accepted that almost cruel proposal? She had naively believed it was the best solution. How ridiculous. Even marriage was reduced to a solution. She was accustomed to handling everything with a business mindset, forgetting that love was never a transaction. She didn't know how to forget someone, nor how to love. She had stumbled blindly into marriage, like an outsider, watching her life slip away in emotionless decisions. Every act of coldness, every moment of distance, pushed the man who deeply loved her further away. For 3 years, she deliberately kept her distance from Ethan, only meeting him on necessary occasions. She thought this was responsible, this was loyalty. But she forgot that true marriage needed not restraint but devotion, habits formed so subtly. Every time she saw news about him, she would subconsciously pay attention, her emotions rising and falling involuntarily. She worried about his difficulties, wanting to help him, burying these feelings deep within, believing she was hiding them well. She forgot how perceptive Sebastian was. The man who was so sharp in the business world couldn't possibly miss her feelings, especially after learning of Ethan's divorce. She desperately wanted to help him, like a drowning person grasping at a lifeline. She wanted to do something for him. He was someone she had loved, and even though she knew it was impossible, she hoped he would find happiness. This underlying affection, she thought she concealed well, was seen clearly by Sebastian. Her anger wasn't just because of his deception. She was furious at Sebastian's abrupt departure, his autocratic behavior, his refusal to give her a chance to explain. But most of all, she was angry with herself. Why had she only understood now? Why wait until she lost him to understand? Little moments flooded her mind. The coffee he made for her late at night in the office, the notes on her desk after his business trips, the warm water he brought when she was sick. Now that they were memories, she realized that Sebastian's presence had been everywhere in her life. Every unintentional act of kindness was a silent expression of his love. Unknowingly, his existence had become so natural, like breathing, like a heartbeat, ordinary yet indispensable, and she had taken too long to realize that true happiness was right beside her. Even after Ethan's divorce, she never considered ending her marriage, because, a long time ago, the moment she got her marriage certificate, the person she wanted to spend her life with was Sebastian. She was simply too obtuse. Only after losing him did she understand the pain. 3 days had passed, the number seeming frozen in time. Every second felt agonizingly long. Victoria stared at her phone screen. His familiar number remained switched off. She couldn't remember how many times she had dialed. Each time the same cold, despairing message. The sky outside grew darker, mirroring the growing panic within her. A sense of helplessness washed over her like a tide. The coffee on the coffee table had long gone cold. Ethan's dozen unread messages lay untouched. She didn't know how to face him or how to begin explaining until Ethan appeared. That familiar face, once the source of her racing heart, now felt strangely calm. "How long have you been without rest?" he asked, noticing the dark circles under her eyes. The concern in his voice was familiar, yet it no longer stirred her. Victoria looked up at the face that had once captivated her, and a sudden calm descended. This, she realized, was what letting go felt like, the sudden cessation of long-term pain, leaving only a faint weariness. "Do you know where I've been?" she asked. The question had lingered in her mind for so long she almost lost the courage to ask. "Seb," Ethan replied, a barely perceptible tremor in his voice. "I've been looking for him," Victoria said, her voice seeming to come from a distant place. All the sleepless nights, all the unburdened guilt, were condensed into that simple sentence. A teacup clinked softly on the table, the sound jarring in the silent office. Ethan's hand paused. "Because of the equity?" he asked. Victoria replied, "Because of me." 3 simple words, yet they contained so much unspoken emotion. She watched the tea leaves sink slowly to the bottom of her cup, then suddenly smiled. "You know," she said, "we've been married for 3 years." A deathly silence fell over the office. This silence was more powerful than any words, like a hammer blow to the heart. Ethan's breath hitched for a moment. He was speechless. He remembered Sebastian's gaze at the private club that day. It hadn't been his imagination. Those deep eyes held so much unspoken information he'd never understood. "Why?" he asked. Victoria replied, "Because I'm too weak, too afraid to face it, to admit it to the..." Rest of the sentence faded into a sigh. For years she'd walled herself off, believing that she could escape her feelings. The tea had grown completely cold, just like the moments they'd missed together, moments they could never relive. Ethan suddenly spoke. "That day he asked me if I liked you." The words were like a knife, shattering Victoria's last defenses. Her fingers trembled slightly, her heart clenched. "I said I didn't know," Ethan continued. He laughed and said, "It doesn't matter. Anyway, it's..." The unfinished sentence hung in the air like a shroud of mist, obscuring all possibilities. "It's what?" "Over. Finished. Let go." Victoria gave a wry smile. "I thought I hid it well," she whispered, tears silently tracing paths down her cheeks, blurring the desk below. Her carefully constructed facade crumbled before someone who truly understood love. It was so pale, so frail. Ethan stood silently, walking to the door before pausing. Some people, he said, don't disappear, you just never really see them. The words were another hammer blow, shattering Victoria's self-deception. The door closed softly. Victoria sat in the empty office, watching the night swallow the city outside. Regret and remorse washed over her, a tidal wave threatening to drown her. She finally understood the deepest hurt wasn't hatred, but unseen love. For years she'd hidden her truest love in the deepest corner of her heart, while the person she cherished most suffered the greatest pain. 7 days after Sebastian left, Victoria was at her wit's end. She'd searched everywhere, contacted everyone, but there was still no sign of him. The helplessness was almost crushing, but at the very bottom she found a strange calm. Clear-headed, she realized that even though the cooling-off period had passed and the divorce wasn't finalized, he would have to appear for the paperwork, either at the courthouse or for the signing. This realization was a beacon, illuminating the fog in her mind. Perhaps this was her last chance. With renewed resolve, her first stop after her leave was Lawrence's office. During this time, Lawrence had relayed countless messages, each one a barb piercing her heart. Seeing her gaunt face, he was about to offer comfort, but she spoke first. Her voice was surprisingly calm, as if she had already accepted the worst.
"Tell
Sebastian," she said, "I agreed to the divorce. Tell him to come and finalize the paperwork." The words were simple, yet they cost her everything. Lawrence nearly spilled his coffee. "Giving up?" he asked. "You two built this together for 3 years." He could see how difficult this decision was for her. Victoria replied, "He doesn't want to communicate. What else can I do? I can't take him to court, can I?" She forced a smile, a bitter, resigned smile. Only she knew the heartache behind it. Back in her office, she leaned back in her leather chair, the tension finally easing. It was merely a tactical move. All she wanted was to see him one more time. If he came back, she would have a chance to explain the unspoken words, the feelings buried deep within her heart. 10 years of love. Surely there was still a chance to salvage it. This thought was a lifeline, giving her the strength to persevere. Meanwhile, I was enjoying the sun at a beachfront resort. Over the past week, I'd visited 3 cities, seen breathtaking landscapes, almost forgetting my worries. Everywhere I went, I wondered what it would be like if she were here with me. But the thought was quickly suppressed. Until Lawrence's message arrived, she agreed to the divorce. The words were like a bucket of cold water, jolting me from my manufactured calm. Looking at my phone screen, I suddenly felt lost. Why had the woman who relentlessly pursued her goals, who never gave up easily, suddenly given in? To be safe, I checked the procedure. Both parties had to be present, otherwise it would go to court. I sighed. It was just ending a relationship. Why was it so difficult? Years of shared emotions, memories now felt like the heaviest burden. Packing my bags, I glanced at my upcoming travel plans, regretfully canceling them. The anticipated landscapes were no match for the reality at hand. The next morning, I landed at the familiar airport, the air thick with a familiarity that felt both comforting and suffocating. Lucy had been waiting. Seeing Sebastian, she exclaimed, "Seb, you're so tanned. The sun shows you've been avoiding things." I joked. "It's called a healthy tan, trying to mask my unease." That lightness vanished when I mentioned Victoria. I said, "Whether it's genuine or not, I'm finishing this. If she changes her mind, we go to court." Lucy replied, "That'll take time." I nodded, sighing. "Exactly, that's why I rushed back. Let's end it." September morning, Victoria received a text, 9 a.m., Grand Hyatt Hotel lobby. The brevity quickened her pulse. A month of waiting, and finally, a meeting. She arrived 30 minutes early, settling on a sofa by a large window. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating the freshly printed divorce papers in her hands. Each word was glaring, a sharp blade piercing her heart, despite her signature. 8:55 a.m., the elevator doors opened. I emerged, walking directly to her, my gaze unwavering. A month apart, I was darker, my features sharper. The face she'd longed for wore a painful strangeness. I asked, "Do you have your ID?" I sat opposite her, my tone as calm as discussing a business deal. The distance felt like a knife twisting in her heart. When did the gentle man she knew become so cold? Victoria looked up, searching my eyes for warmth. "Is this?" she began, her voice trembling, a tremor she didn't realize. "What else?" I asked, adjusting my tie. "Should we exchange pleasantries, discuss the weather, can we talk?" she pleaded, desperate for a chance. "After the paperwork," I interrupted, the man who once obeyed her every wish now refusing her. "I don't have my ID," she said, her voice distant. I stood. Then another day. My tone was icy. Victoria whispered, "Please." Her fingers gripping my wrist were almost painfully warm. "Let me explain," she choked out, the proud Queen V humbled. The warmth of her touch briefly stilled me. I looked at her delicate hand as if it belonged to a stranger. For a moment I wavered, but my coldness returned. "Victoria," I said, slowly withdrawing my hand, my voice colder. "Missed opportunities never return. Explanations waste time." Each word was precise, hitting its mark. "Sebastian," she cried, her voice full of despair. "No more theatrics," I said, turning to leave. "We're both busy. Let's meet at the courthouse. But if we don't finalize it within 30 days, she protested. "Stop citing legal clauses," I interrupted, pausing but not turning. My voice held a suppressed pain. "If you don't love me, why the clinging? Are you unhappy with the asset division?" The sun shone brightly, yet it couldn't reach Victoria's heart. Watching my back, she realized some things, once lost, are gone forever. Outside the Grand Hyatt, city lights twinkled, mirroring her chaotic thoughts. Looking at her coffee, she whispered, "Sebastian, what do you want?" The proud woman was pleading. "A divorce," I replied, my voice cold. "I didn't mean anything else," she stammered. "Mean what?" I asked, my voice a blade severing her hopes. I want to understand why," she looked up, her eyes filled with supplication. "Why? Won't you give me a chance?" Unspoken words, unexpressed feelings clung to her question. I stared at her, a flicker of surprise in my eyes. The formidable businesswoman was vulnerable. For a moment I almost relented, but the painful memories returned. "Understand what?" I scoffed, bitterness lacing my voice. "You chose Xiang. Isn't that clear enough?" Each word was a reminder to myself to not soften. "That's not true," she said, her knuckles white as she clenched her fists. "You misunderstand." Her explanation was too late, unable to mend the cracks in my heart. "Misunderstand?" I interrupted. "I'm stating facts." The quiet nights of waiting, the unspoken emotions in her eyes, they were all the evidence I needed. In that moment, Victoria finally understood. All my resolve stemmed from a misunderstanding she'd never explained. She took a deep breath, striving for composure. "I read the emails," she said, her voice even. "You think I still care about Ethan, right? Isn't that obvious?" I countered, the question bitter on my tongue. The years she thought she'd hidden her feelings so well, I'd seen through them all. She forced herself to meet my gaze. "I'm sorry," she said, the words laced with regret. "I should have been clear. I kept avoiding it, letting this misunderstanding drag on." "There's nothing to say," I replied, rising to my feet and straightening my jacket, as if to shake off the residual emotions. "Since you've made your choice, let's just call it quits." As I turned to leave, she spoke, her voice imbued with an unprecedented sincerity. "I truly wanted to spend my life with you." The statement seemed to have drained her of all her courage. My steps faltered. I turned back, studying her face, searching for confirmation. That brief pause gave Victoria a flicker of hope, I chuckled, a wry sound. You know, I said, the worst thing isn't when someone lies, it's when they deceive themselves. Do you truly believe what you just said? The icy coldness in my eyes stung Victoria, but she persevered. From the day he married, I decided to let go. You gave me a home, showed me warmth, showed me. She trailed off, unable to utter the word love. Don't, I interrupted, weariness heavy in my voice. Good acting, but too little, too late. Ethan's single now. You two are perfect for each other. Each word was a reminder to myself not to soften. How can you be so sure? Her voice was laced with despair, yet she couldn't finish the sentence. Gazed out at the night, a pain she couldn't comprehend reflected in my eyes. Because I saw it clearly, I said, for 3 years you've never truly seen me. What are you best at? I asked suddenly, the question a blade piercing her heart. Victoria was taken aback. What? She watched my suddenly severe expression, unease washing over her. I continued, my tone dripping with sarcasm. Investment analysis. You're brilliant at seeing the core of a company, yet you've spent 3 years looking at me and still haven't seen the real me. The words sent a sharp pang through Victoria's heart. She finally realized that the sarcastic man before her was the true Sebastian. The polite, gentle facade was a carefully constructed image to maintain this relationship. I know, Victoria said remorsefully. I don't deserve to say anything. It's too late, I replied, picking up my coffee, my gaze drifting to the window. Anything was more interesting than her. You should know, I continued, missed opportunities never return. People don't either. Victoria watched my profile, a sharp pain seizing her heart. This Sebastian was a world away from the man in her memories, the man who was always forgiving of her capriciousness. The ever-gentle smile, the infinitely patient gaze, they felt alien. Yet, upon reflection, which Sebastian was real? A tech titan, a powerhouse in the business world, couldn't possibly be that gentle. 3 years of suppressed emotions, all to maintain a relationship he thought worth fighting for. And she'd taken all his sacrifices for granted. Those late nights of waiting, the silent concern, the suppressed grievances, she'd selectively ignored them all. Worse, she'd repeatedly rubbed salt in his wounds, using work to deflect his hopes, overtime to avoid his tenderness, and Ethan to erode his confidence. The realization was agonizing. She could feel the blood rushing through her body, every heartbeat a scream of pain. His patience and accommodation were his compromises to preserve their marriage. The bitterness welled up. How much had Sebastian endured to repress his sharp personality into that gentle demeanor? She hadn't been blind. She'd simply chosen to ignore it. She took all his sacrifices for granted, even using Ethan to chip away at his faith until he was utterly disillusioned with their relationship. Every concerned glance towards Ethan, every involuntary emotional shift when his name was mentioned, they were time bombs she'd planted in their marriage. The realization was a scalpel, precisely dissecting her heart, the pain radiating from every nerve ending, leaving her breathless. The warmth she thought would never fade, the acceptance she took for granted, she destroyed it all. I stood. Vicky said distantly, Seb, next time, remember to bring all the necessary documents. Don't make excuses next time we meet. For 3 years she had pushed away the person she should have cherished most, and naively believed she could still win him back. Victoria's voice trembled as she suppressed her pride and said, Sebastian, can you give me a little more time? Let me prove. Vicky, I interrupted, my voice colder than ever. Prove what? You've wasted 3 years. Don't waste any more of each other's futures. Victoria watched my back, suddenly wanting to ask how I had endured all this over the past 3 years. But she no longer had the right. It was all her fault. She had pushed their most precious relationship into the abyss. When I turned around, I saw Victoria leaning against the door, almost unsteady. I narrowed my eyes. This woman, usually so decisive and efficient in the financial world, was putting on a show for whom? "Are you feeling unwell?" I asked, my tone laced with obvious suspicion. I'd witnessed her many performances in the business world over the years. This vulnerability was just another act in my eyes. Victoria heard the doubt in my voice, and a pang of bitterness filled her heart. She shook her head, straightened herself, and said, "No need to wait until next time. The documents are in the car. Let's go through with it today." She smiled wryly under my questioning gaze. "Shall we go?" Only after she opened the door did I relax my guard and follow her. The elevator was silent, so quiet that we could hear each other's breaths. I kept checking my watch, afraid of missing our appointment. My urgency stung Victoria's eyes. As soon as we got out of the elevator, I even took her wrist and walked quickly. This sudden contact made her heart skip a beat, instantly recalling a scene from 3 years ago. She remembered Sebastian being just as urgent then, as if afraid she would change her mind, holding her hand tightly. Back then she had been preoccupied, only smiling when she saw his nervousness, and therefore less resistant. Who would have thought that the two people who had once walked into the marriage hall would now be here to sign the papers and end it all? The warmth she had taken for granted, the love she had ignored, now turned into deep regret. Looking at the people coming and going in the civil registry office, she suddenly felt that ending things wasn't so terrible. Since he believed it was a mistake, let it end here. She wouldn't hold on to someone unwilling. But from today onwards, she would wait for him in a different capacity. This time, she would chase him. He might not give her the same chance she had given him, but it didn't matter. She was willing to wait 10 more years, even the rest of her life, because when she said "I do," she had already decided on him. She was simply too late to understand that love wasn't a given, it needed nurturing. When the paperwork was finished, it was rush hour. I looked at the brand new divorce certificate and breathed a sigh of relief. That moment of ease brought Victoria pain, but it also strengthened her determination to start over. "All right," I said. "Thanks for the past 3 years. Goodbye." I turned to leave, my relief unconcealed, but she suddenly grabbed my arm. "Who says goodbye?" she said. This time she wouldn't let go so easily. I looked down at the divorce certificate, then back up at her, my eyes full of confusion. "This isn't over. The marriage is over," she said firmly, without hesitation. "But we still have other relationships." "What other relationships could we possibly have?" I scoffed. "At the very least, we're still in the same circle," she said, meeting my gaze with unprecedented determination. "I remember you said that after the divorce anything could be discussed." I remembered saying that, but it was only to get her to finalize the paperwork quickly. Who knew she'd take it seriously? This woman, who never easily gave up, was displaying surprising tenacity. "I did say that," I said, feigning nonchalance and trying to mask my unease with a joke. "But not now. When then?" she asked, her grip unwavering. Her voice laced with a stubbornness I had never heard before. "Are you going to disappear silently again, like last time?" Her words hit a nerve. My eyes flickered and I instinctively avoided her gaze. The days of deliberate avoidance, the nights of reluctance, were all exposed by that one sentence. "You changed all your contact information," she continued. "If we weren't in the same financial circle, you'd be untraceable." Each word was like a knife, precisely cutting through my disguise. I felt a pang of guilt. I had indeed done that, more than once. Every time I thought of her, I instinctively chose to escape, as if that would release me from those unwarranted attachments. Voice trembled as she asked, "Are your words so worthless?" I frowned, my tone hardening. "Are you questioning me?" I instinctively erected my defenses, only to be undone by her next words. "No," Victoria smiled slightly. "I just want to remind you that you once taught me that a person should be true to their word." Her words left me speechless. Sharp sting of her past advice now felt like a sword, leaving me with nowhere to run. Taking a deep breath, I finally relented. "Fine," I said. "What do you want to talk about?" "I heard you're emigrating to England," she said softly. "Is it to avoid me?" The question hit me like a hammer, striking my most vulnerable point. My fingers faltered and my cup clattered against the marble table. "Are you interrogating me?" I asked, looking up. Victoria smiled slightly. "Just concerned," she replied. "We've known each other for so many years. There should be a proper goodbye, proper?" I scoffed, the sarcasm uncontainable. "Wasn't saying goodbye at the courthouse proper enough?" Victoria wasn't angered by my mockery. She stepped closer. "If you think it's proper, why avoid me? Why run so far?" Her words were like needles, piercing my pain. I stood, my voice laced with suppressed anger. "I didn't run." Victoria tilted her head. "Oh? Then why the sudden departure?" Silence filled the empty cafe, broken only by the shifting neon lights outside, casting flickering shadows on our faces. Unspoken words and pent-up emotions swirled in the quiet. I feigned indifference, letting out a cold laugh. "Your information network is impressive, but it's none of your concern anymore." She nodded. "It's not, but is this how you plan to leave without a word?" I frowned. "Do I need to report my movements to you?" She shook her head. "It's not about clinging. Some things need to be said." "Didn't we say everything we needed to today?" I asked. "That was your perspective," she replied. Victoria smoothed her dress, walking towards me. Her eyes met mine. I tried to remain calm. "Vicky, you can't possibly think I still care. The autumn in New York was always fickle." As I turned to leave, rain started to fall, a deluge washing away any lingering reluctance. Victoria watched my anger, a warmth stirring within her. "It's raining," she said, knowingly yet still compelled to show concern. "I took the subway," I snapped, my irritation obvious. "Taxis are hard to find here," she said, her voice soft. "If you don't mind, I'll drive you." Ignoring her, I turned to leave, pausing at the edge of the rain. "It's going to pour," her voice followed, a hint of amusement in it. "I can't stop you from getting wet, but—" Her steps hesitated. Victoria watched my frozen figure, a slight curve to her lips. This man, she thought, still couldn't resist softening despite his stubborn words. Some habits, like the years of ingrained gentleness, were deeply rooted. The car was quiet, save for the drumming rain on the windshield. The downpour intensified, a rhythmic pounding on the roof, like a mournful melody. Even breathing was clear in the enclosed space. Unspoken words hung heavy in the air. Victoria watched the rain streak down the windshield and smiled. "Do you remember our first date?" she asked. "Don't bring that up," I said coldly. She seemingly ignored me. "It was a rainy day just like this. You forgot your umbrella and insisted on giving me your jacket. You caught a fever the next day but said you didn't regret it." Warm memories fell like raindrops on my heart. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. Memories I'd carefully locked away flooded back, my heart pounding uncontrollably. I tried to force myself to forget, but each detail was painfully clear. "Victoria," I said, my voice a warning. "We're divorced." "Yes, we are," she nodded calmly. "But Seb, divorce doesn't erase the past, those good memories, those heartfelt moments. Are they so easily dismissed?" Silence stretched for a few seconds, the rain seeming louder in the quiet. I turned, my gaze sharp. "What are you trying to say?" "I want to say." Victoria met my eyes, her gaze unwavering. "You claim you don't care, but you still have that pocket watch. You said you wanted to sever all ties, but you remember I'm afraid of rain. You said you never wanted to see me again, yet you got into my car." Her questions were like daggers, piercing my heart. I looked away, my voice hoarse. "Habit," I mumbled. Even I didn't believe that excuse. "Oh?" Victoria chuckled softly. "Do you know what my habit is? I don't give up easily. In the financial world, everyone said I couldn't do it, but I persevered. And it's the same now. I won't give up on someone I've set my mind on. I turned, meeting her determined gaze. The rain on the window seemed distant. I heard only her soft voice. Give me a chance. Give yourself a chance. Please. The long silence hung heavy before I finally spoke. Victoria, I began, you've always been like this. You couldn't let go of Ethan while we were together. And now that we're divorced, you're chasing after me. I offered a cynical smile. My next words were brutally honest. Victoria, is it only after losing me that you decide to pursue me? A red light blinked on. Victoria slammed on the brakes. My movements were faster than she anticipated. Before she could stop me, I opened the car door. Her desperate cry trailed behind me as I shut the door. She yelled something, but it was swallowed by the sound of the closing car door. I had a flight booked for the next day, a flight I'd booked when I returned from abroad. My immigration papers were all in order. I'd decided before coming back that even if Victoria disagreed, or if the divorce wasn't finalized smoothly, I wouldn't waste any more time on her. Even if she relentlessly pursued me, even if she decided to sue, I had a plan. With everything entrusted to Lawrence, my lawyer. Rain-lashed street was deserted, the sycamore trees bent and battered by the wind. I chose a random small diner to take shelter from the storm. And there, unexpectedly, I saw someone I never thought I'd see again, Ethan. A month had passed, and he looked much more haggard than before. The exhaustion in his eyes was undeniable. The waiter brought a cup of hot tea, but Ethan just stared at the rising steam, lost in thought, until the sound of footsteps startled him. He looked up, his face lighting up in recognition. Seb, he said. Ethan instantly recognized me, rising to his feet, a hint of awkwardness in his demeanor. Call me Sebastian, I replied, settling into the seat opposite him and gesturing for the waiter to bring another tea. I examined him, subtly frowning. This despondent Ethan was a far cry from the ambitious financial whiz I remembered. Neither of us were particularly talkative. Only soft background music filled the silence, punctuated by the laughter of a couple at the next table, making the silence even more awkward. Finally, Ethan broke the quiet. Sebastian, he began. I've been wanting to apologize. I raised an eyebrow, tapping my fingers on the edge of my coffee cup. Apologize? Why? I asked. That night at the bar, he said, his voice laced with guilt, avoiding my gaze. I didn't know about your relationship with Victoria. I said things I shouldn't have. I'm truly sorry, he added. I studied his expression before speaking. We chose to keep our marriage a secret. It's understandable you didn't know. No, it's more than that, Ethan countered, his fingers curling. His coffee cup clinked against the saucer. I actually knew about Victoria's feelings for a long time, but I pretended not to notice. Then I got married and my marriage went south. She helped me through it. I thought she still liked me. I had feelings I shouldn't have. So what's your relationship like now? I interrupted. Ethan paused, a wry smile touching his lips. Siblings, he said. We'll always just be siblings. He looked me in the eye. I could feel it. She changed somewhere along the line. She let go of her feelings for me. I could tell. She looks at me like she looks at a brother. Why didn't you stop our divorce then? I asked. Because by the time I realized the truth, it was too late. Ethan's voice choked with emotion. Seeing her frantically search for you, I understood. She truly loved you and I wasn't that special person to her anymore. Sebastian, do you know? She's lost so much weight. She's completely worn down. I've never seen her like this. Not even when I got married. She wasn't this distraught. My fingers paused on my coffee cup, a barely perceptible shift in my eyes. Are you so sure? I asked. Absolutely, Ethan declared, his eyes locked on mine, his tone increasingly earnest. Sebastian, give her a chance. Give yourself a chance. Don't let a misunderstanding ruin a hard-won relationship. He paused. Do you? Do you really not care about her at all? I didn't answer immediately. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the table. My gaze fell on the now cold tea, my thoughts drifting far away. Memories I thought I'd buried surged back like a tide. Ethan spoke softly. "Don't you believe me?" He looked at me, suddenly understanding why the ever-proud Victoria was so persistent. Sebastian, he realized, possessed such a rational and extreme personality. Yet for 3 years he'd forced himself to become gentle and refined for Victoria. After a long silence, I finally spoke. "It's not that I don't believe you, it's just feelings. Who can truly understand them?" Each word was heavy with exhaustion, the weariness of a life worn down by the trials of love. "You doubt her sincerity?" Ethan asked. Victoria's change was evident, yet his eyes held a questioning look. I offered a wry smile, bitterness masking my resentment. "If true feelings were easily discerned," I said, "the world wouldn't be filled with so much regret." Years of waiting and disappointment culminated in this helpless sigh. Ethan leaned forward, his tone earnest. "But Sebastian, some things can't be hidden. After you disappeared, she searched for you relentlessly, day and night." "That proves nothing," I interrupted. "Then tell me," Ethan said, his gaze unwavering, "what would?" The question hit the mark. I was speechless. I'd grown accustomed to Victoria's neglect, her relentless pursuit, a decade-long experience unlike any other. I pursed my lips, unable to formulate a counter-argument. "Sebastian," he said, "let go of your prejudices. Mutual devotion is the rarest treasure in love. Since you both still care, why not give each other another chance?" "It's over," I replied, my voice hoarse. "Is it?" Ethan's smile faltered. "Then why do your eyes dart away whenever you mention her? Don't lie to yourself, Sebastian. You haven't let her go." I abruptly stood, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. The emotions I'd buried so deep threatened to spill over. Taking a deep breath, I declared, "This ends here. Thank you for your honesty. The rest is between her and me. You have no right to interfere." "Wait." Ethan rose too. "One last question." My heart pounded as I paused. "If you'd known I was just a brother figure to Victoria," he asked, "would you still have divorced?" Ethan's words echoed in my mind, a seed taking root. In the VIP lounge, I stood before the panoramic window, watching planes take off and land, my thoughts a chaotic mess. Each plane seemed to carry my thoughts far away, only to bring my anxieties back to memories I wished to avoid. "Seb, your ticket and visa are ready." Lucy, my assistant, handed me the folder, her voice hesitant. "Are you sure about this? Never coming back?" I took the documents without speaking. Though I'd never admitted it, part of my departure was an escape. I needed to leave, to find a place for some peace. But how much longing was hidden within that peace, even I couldn't say. Only Lucy saw me off. As I walked through the VIP passage, her constant reminders echoed in my ears, mirroring someone's concern for him years ago. "Remember to eat on time," she said. "Don't overwork yourself. Contact me if anything happens. Call if you need anything." "I'm going to London, not a deserted island," I said wryly. "I don't need this much fuss." "You didn't contact me for a week on your last business trip to Singapore," Lucy said, concern etched on her face. "I almost called the police. This time it's a year. I have to worry." "I was busy with a merger," I chuckled. "I did bury myself in work, trying to forget things." Lucy became serious. "That's why I'm warning you, don't shut yourself in the office, remember." "I'm boarding now," I interrupted her, turning towards security. Her warnings stirred up so many memories. After security, I took off my watch and placed it in the tray. A familiar figure caught my eye, making my heart skip a beat. I turned sharply, only to see a stranger. "Wrong," I muttered, but texted Lucy, "What's Victoria been up to lately?" My instinctive concern surprised even me. Lucy replied, "Vicky submitted her resignation yesterday. She seems to be going to London. I don't know the details." My heart leaped. That familiar unease returned. I hurried towards the gate, but a familiar voice stopped me. Excuse me? My body froze. I slowly turned, meeting her smiling eyes. Time seemed to stand still. My escape crumbled. Victoria stood behind me, a perfectly timed look of surprise on her face. "Fancy meeting you here," she said, her tone light, yet my heart pounded. "What are you doing here?" I asked coldly. She showed me her ticket. "Going to London, same flight as you." Her smile was mischievous, like a successful hunter. I noticed her seat number, realizing this was no coincidence. This woman never gave up what she wanted. The cabin was quiet, only the faint sound of breathing. Victoria glanced at the man beside her, pretending to sleep. His brow was furrowed, his lashes fluttering, clearly still disturbed by their conversation. She remembered 3 years ago, when they first got married. He used to sit on the sofa pretending to read when she came home late from work. Victoria's eyes had been stealing glances at the doorway, but he always pretended not to notice, even avoiding his concern. Looking back, those subtle acts of kindness, those restrained gazes, those ignored expectations, had unknowingly accumulated into today's decisive break. Victoria sighed softly. Since he wasn't willing to listen now, she would wait. This time, she would wait for him, wait until he was willing to turn back. The 2-hour flight passed quickly. When the plane landed at Heathrow Airport, dawn was breaking. Victoria followed Sebastian, watching him efficiently retrieve his luggage and stride purposefully towards the exit. He walked quickly, as if trying to leave something behind, but Victoria followed calmly, her gaze fixed on his tall, strong back, a back she had once ignored, but now couldn't tear her eyes away from. "Sebastian," she called out, just as he was about to get into a taxi. He stopped, but didn't turn around. "Everything that needed to be said has been said," he said coldly. "Are you still going to cling to me?" The coldness in his voice was like a knife, but it couldn't cut through her determination. She took a step forward. "Not everything," she said. "Let's call it quits on the last 3 years, but there are 7 years before that and a lifetime to come. We still have so much to talk about." "What's there to talk about?" He scoffed, his voice seemingly calm, yet laced with deep pain. "Isn't it just that I foolishly chased you for 7 years and now we'll each go our separate ways?" Victoria silently watched Sebastian's back, suddenly remembering a night 10 years ago. She had been standing in front of the library when he, the boy who had repeatedly created chance encounters with her, confessed with a touch of shyness. She had simply replied, "Thank you," and turned away. Back then, she thought that would make him give up, but he stubbornly said, "You may not like me now, but the future is uncertain. Victoria, don't jump to conclusions so soon." She had dismissed it as typical male stubbornness, even secretly amused by it. But now, that persistent figure that night, that stubborn promise, had quietly etched itself into her memory. "The past is settled," she said, "but the future is uncertain. Sebastian, don't jump to conclusions so soon." He spun around, his gaze sharp, searching her face for a hint of a joke, but Victoria's eyes were unwavering. In the soft morning light, her gaze was clear and deep, as if she intended to make up for 7 years of neglect and 3 years of estrangement with the rest of her life. Years ago, she had used a dismissive thank you to put an end to their story, but she hadn't expected him to spend 7 years, countless chance encounters, and the utmost patience to erase that full stop. Although their marriage had begun hastily and ended decisively, it was during those 3 years that she gradually understood her own heart and saw Sebastian's goodness, the kindness she had once ignored, the expectations she had overlooked, the affections she had never reciprocated. All had become the deepest pain in her heart after their divorce. Sunlight brightened, casting a soft glow on their figures. Victoria watched Sebastian's jawline soften, knowing he was wavering. She understood his stubbornness, his pride, and the heart he had never truly let go of. This time, she would wait for him to turn back, with more patience and a longer time than the 7 years before. to finish this unfinished story. Sebastian, she said softly, don't rush to refuse me. Let's make a bet. He frowned. What kind of bet? She looked up, meeting his eyes. If I can find you before tonight, you'll grant me one request. He scoffed. Do you think that's possible? A slight smile touched her lips. Let's see. You have nothing to lose, right? And if you lose? Her voice was soft, yet each word was clear. If I lose, I'll never appear in front of you again. He stared at her for a long time, as if verifying the truth of her words. Finally, he nodded. Deal. As he turned to leave, he suddenly asked, You seem very certain you'll win. You don't need to know, she replied. Victoria turned and walked away. Even she didn't know where that certainty came from. The cold wind dispersed her last shred of hope and blew away her forced courage. This city was so vast. Finding someone determined to leave in a sea of faces would require immense luck. A 9 a.m. bus slowly pulled away. She watched the neon lights flash by outside, her fingers unconsciously tapping the armrest. Where would Sebastian go? A hotel? A cafe? Then a thought suddenly struck her. She pressed the stop button. The cafe was still lit. She pushed open the door, her eyes instinctively drawn to his usual seat. It was empty, except for a half-finished Americano. A waiter approached to clear the table. She stopped him. When was this coffee made? She asked. A gentleman ordered it a little while ago, the waiter replied. He said he wouldn't be back. Her heart sank. She checked her watch, 11:40 p.m. Her heartbeat accelerated. This was her last chance. She ran through the deserted streets, the click-clack of her heels echoing sharply in the night. Passers-by glanced at her, but she ignored them. As she turned a corner, a beautiful melody drifted from a music store, a nocturne, but with a new decisive undertone. She stood at the crosswalk, watching the seconds tick by, her heart pounding, tears welling in her eyes. Fortunately, time was on her side. As the clock struck 11:59 p.m., Victoria pushed open the studio door. The music stopped abruptly. The person at the piano looked up. Their eyes met, and Victoria crumbled. It wasn't Sebastian. The man, without a word, closed the piano lid, picked up an umbrella from the corner, and left. Victoria stood alone in the empty studio, the piano bathed in moonlight. On the piano lid sat a lonely cell phone. She'd installed a tracking app on it. That's why she'd been so sure of herself. Now she knew she had lost. Lost completely. Sebastian, she whispered, her voice choked with unshed tears. You could be so cruel. The sound of rain outside blurred with her tears. She leaned against the piano, her thoughts drifting to a past she could never reclaim. Gazing out at the night, her voice trembled. I was so foolish. I knew you were leaving, yet I clung to that sliver of hope. I thought if I tried hard enough, I could find you. Finally, her tears broke free. But you wouldn't even give me a proper goodbye. The clock struck 12. Only her stifled sobs filled the studio. The woman who once ruled the financial world was now a lost child, curled in a corner. Sebastian, she barely whispered, I was wrong. London was never your destination. The rain stopped. The silence of the studio amplified the fragility of her voice. How could I forget? You've always hated rainy seasons, and London is always rainy. From the plane soaring above the clouds, a golden light fell on my face. Even without seeing Victoria's despair, I could imagine the scene. I no longer cared. I knew why she was so certain of victory. She'd installed the tracker on my phone during our last meeting. Victoria seemed always so sure of my feelings, as if all the post-divorce drama was just playful banter between us. But I was tired of her endless entanglement. I knew seeing that phone would break her, but I no longer cared. I'd played the role of a fake persona for 7 years. From now on, I'd be myself. I breathed a mist onto the window and wrote 2 words with my finger, goodbye. It wasn't a farewell to Victoria. but to the tamed version of myself. From now on, I wouldn't suppress myself for anyone. This time I could be truly me,